Hi, guys. Welcome to A Little Help for Our Friends, a podcast for people with loved ones struggling with mental health. Hey, little helpers. It's Dr. Kibbe here. Before we dive into this episode, I wanted to tell you how I could help you navigate the mental health or addiction struggles of the people you love. Cool of Mine is the online coaching platform and community that I built to support you in the moment when you need it the most, like having hard conversations, asserting your needs, or setting boundaries. Even if you're just curious and want to chat about it, book a free call with me by going to the link in the show notes or going to coolamind.com, KULAMIND.com, and click Get Started. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hey, little helpers. Today we have a really special guest for you. His name is Shou, the star of the movie Rosemead, which is going to be out in theaters January 9th. So it's probably out by the time you listen to this. I was lucky enough to go to an early screening of this movie, and it blew me away. It was so moving. I'm still processing it. Like, it'll just pop in my head randomly throughout the day, and I'll just be thinking about it. Without giving too much of it away, I'll tell you it's about a Chinese immigrant mother named Irene and her son, Joe. Lucy Liu plays Irene, and Lawrence plays her son, Joe. And Lawrence discovered that she has terminal cancer while she's trying to support her son, who's struggling with schizophrenia. And I can't say too much about it, and don't look this up until you see the movie. But the movie is actually based on a true story that was reported in the LA Times in 2017. And the movie is so clearly a meaningful labor of love. After the screening, Lucy Liu told the audience that the movie was actually really hard to make. It was hard to get off the ground because it wasn't the typical Hollywood movie. But they fought to get it made because she was like, this story needs to be told. People need to be aware that this is happening, that families are struggling with mental illness. And this is what can happen. This is what it can look like. So the movie really does spark so much conversation and reveal how difficult it is to deal with mental illness in the family, especially for people who are overlooked, isolated, marginalized, and who slip through the cracks of our traditional healthcare system. So I was thrilled to have this conversation with Lawrence. He's so nice, and he gave literally one of the best performances of schizophrenia I've ever seen. It shook me to my core watching him. I remember leaving the movie and asking my husband, like, who was that actor? He was so good. It just blew me away, honestly. So in this episode, he shares what he's learned about schizophrenia, all that he did to really research it and understand how schizophrenia is way more common than we think. And he also talks about what it took to deliver such an authentic performance for his first major feature debut. It's crazy. He's so talented. So I'm just so excited to have this conversation with him before he becomes a super famous star. And it was just a fascinating conversation about mental illness, community, and what we need to do to support each other through something so difficult. So please enjoy. Welcome back, little helpers. We have a really, really special guest today. I'm so excited to have this conversation. We have Shou talking to us about his role in Rosemead, this movie that I don't know if I've had a similar reaction to a movie before. I mean, it was just, I'm still processing it, but it is such a powerful movie about mental health and culture and family mental health and so many things. So I'm just so happy to talk to you today, Lauren. So thank you for joining us.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about the movie because I don't want to give away too much, but what is Rosemead about? What was your role in it? Tell us about that.
First of all, I play in Rosemead, I play Joe, the son. This story is a true story. It was inspired by a true story. It was an event that happened back in 2015 in the actual town of Rosemead in the San Gabriel Valley in Los Angeles County. Um, it's a story I think that is very relevant, very powerful, very moving. It deals with the Asian American immigrant community. It deals with mental health, the mental health community. I don't want to get too much into spoilers, but just to give a little bit of background, it's about a mother who is an immigrant raising her son who struggles with schizophrenia, or Joe, like I mentioned earlier. I play Joe, the son. And Joe, obviously, he has his own tremendous struggles, as well as Irene, the mother, who is also dealing with a cancer diagnosis, and as well as Joe's father, who actually passed away a few months ago from another cancer diagnosis. So there is a lot of struggle, a lot of trauma, a lot of weight, but I think there's also a lot of hope in this movie and a lot of love. I think that's something that we really want to get across as actors and as filmmakers when we were making this movie is that even though, yes, this movie is very heavy and there's a lot of topics in here that are difficult to talk about, difficult to watch, there's also a lot of love because these are two people who really, really love each other. You know, there is a connection here between this mother and this son that is really beautiful, and it makes this story worth watching because it kind of shows just how damaging stigmas and expectations and community, the lack of support from community can be for two people. Because these two people, they loved each other so much and they were like any other mother and son. They could have had a normal life. Unfortunately, they dealt with just so much pain and so much suffering and received, no support and did not know how to ask for support. And because of that, had to end with so much tragedy. But I really want people to watch this movie and recognize that not only is there tragedy, but there's also love. And in that, we can find hope so that we can help other people who are going through situations like this one, because Joe and Irene, as tough and as difficult as it may be to hear, they are not a unique story, unfortunately. They are real people, and there are people like them, lives who parallel their own situations all over the world. And as viewers, we can be mindful of that and we can learn that, hey, we can help people like this. We can watch these stories, we can educate ourselves, and we can reach out to people who are going through situations like this one.
So beautifully said. Of just like, just the movie is like going through my mind, and I'm just so. Ugh. Anyway, I'm just like overwhelmed. Um, that is so beautiful to focus on the love, and um, it's such a different and interesting and deep love between a parent and a child when there's a severe mental illness involved because just watching it too, I'm a new mother myself, and just thinking about how painful that would be to have a son who's struggling with something, right? There's something that you don't understand, like a chronic illness. It's just like you want your children to be happy and safe, and then when something like this comes up, it's like parents are at a loss. So, can you can you tell us a little bit about when you were preparing for the role of Joe, or when you were thinking about Joe, like how did you like? I mean, I just was so blown away by your performance. Honestly, I like at the
Thank
end
you.
of the movie, I turned to my husband and I was like, "Who is that actor? Is it like who is he?" It was incredible. How did you approach Joe, getting into the character of Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, I find so much parallel with Joe and myself. Being that I'm Asian American, I grew up, with Asian immigrant parents. I had
Where's your family from?
friends. Yeah, so my parents are both from mainland China.
Uh-huh,
They immigrated here when they were in college. My mom's from Qingdao. My
uh-huh.
dad's he's from Yangzhou. So they were, very, very when they came here, they were very much like Irene in this story. They came here with virtually nothing, and they kind of had to build themselves up. A true just immigrant story. And so for me personally, I found a lot of similarities growing up. I know what it feels like to have immigrant parents who, they don't really fit into the community and you don't really fit into the community and you have Asian American friends, and non-Asian American friends who, you kind of try to get along with, but, it's always a sort of distance. So I know what it feels like to have that sort of like society, that sort of, distance, that sort of stigma that comes from the community, being an Asian American, being an immigrant. I know what it feels like. I also know what it feels like to have the stigma of mental health within the Asian American community,
Mm.
because it's something that I think is very real, and very unfortunate that so many Asian American families and so many Asian American, parents, they don't necessarily want to talk about mental health, especially to their children. It's oftentimes just, your grades, how you're doing in school, what's your extracurriculars, it's all very career oriented, focused on, being successful, but they don't have that sort of awareness of what's going on the inside, which a lot of times as a young man, I know for myself growing up, it was incredibly hard. And I know I'm actually one of the lucky ones because my mom, she was a little more progressive, I think, than a lot of other Asian parents, and she actually started working in mental health when I was in college. So yes, yes, it was. She's an academic advisor at a youth home. It's for kids with neurodivergencies who struggle with, you know, yeah, with mental health, and so she kind of had this. Well, obviously, growing up as when I was very young, before she started doing this, she was more of the traditional type, but as she got older, she educated herself a little more, and so she was a little more accepting, and I think that is so incredibly powerful, for myself. Even now, like I'm so glad that she was able to do that because I think so many kids need it. Um, and yeah, so when I was approaching Joe, I brought a lot of myself to him. I brought a lot of the feelings that I had growing up. And then the rest of it just kind of, especially with the schizophrenia, I had experiences with knowing what it feels like to grow up Asian. I don't have too many experiences with the schizophrenia itself. That just came down to the director, Eric. He took his time, both me and him, we spent a lot of time just researching what it means to have schizophrenia, what it feels like. We wanted really to honor the memory of Joe and honor the people who do have schizophrenia because it's something that is so universal. I realize it more now that we finished this film that there are so many people who either struggle with schizophrenia or know someone who struggles with schizophrenia. It's something that is so widespread. And so when we were filming and we were researching, it all came down to knowing exactly what we would want, what Joe was going through. We wanted to really get in his head and know that, hey, this is something that, someone else could be watching one day and think, this is something that they could have experienced and they could put themselves in their shoes. And we wanted to honor that. We really wanted to be diligent and take our time with that. Um, and yeah, we spent many many days, many weeks. I think we had about I think it was about a month before we shot, or we just prepped, and so it was reading books, interviews. We interviewed doctors, psychiatrists. We did everything we could, and we wanted to make sure also that I was comfortable with the material, because it was this heavy world that I was diving into, and we wanted it to be sound and be safe for myself. And to that, I just give so much credit to him because Eric, he was both him and Lucy and the entire Rosemead cast, but they were like my support system. I could not have done this without them.
That's amazing. That's amazing you did that much research. What did you learn about schizophrenia? Like coming from, like people probably listening or like kind of have a picture in their mind of what it looks like. But what did you learn in that research about what the experience of schizophrenia really is?
Yeah, actually, one of the biggest things that I learned, and this is something I say sometimes when we do Q&As, and it was something that I didn't necessarily know before. I knew like kind of what schizophrenia was before I took on this role, but after I took it on and we started researching, I really got the chance to like educate myself, really just learn truly what schizophrenia was and what it means. which again, is also my hope for people watching this film. I hope it does spark an interest in people who, maybe if you aren't super aware of schizophrenia like I was, maybe you want to learn a little bit more. I think that would be very helpful. I think it would be, I think we need more of that. We need more people to educate themselves on schizophrenia and mental health. But yeah, I think the biggest thing that I learned, and to me is oftentimes something that I echo, is that schizophrenia does not is not one certain set of symptoms. When we look at schizophrenia, a lot of times we think of people screaming on the streets. We think of people breaking things and looking crazy. And schizophrenia can look like that. However, it doesn't always. Schizophrenia is unique to every single person. It's oftentimes compounded by your own trauma and your own experiences in your life. So, for example, I'll take Joe. Joe was a young man who dealt with an incredible amount of trauma. His father passed away in front of him. His mother had cancer, or his mother was diagnosed with cancer. And so, as a result, that all kind of factored in, and it shaped the way that his schizophrenia manifested. It wasn't as simple as, oh, he's going crazy. Oh, he has schizophrenia. Oh, he's seeing things. It was, a lot of it was from what he saw in real life. And that kind of changed the way that he was going through these episodes. It almost kind of, I want to say, it all came from a place of protection. It's something that we in the movie is harped on a little bit. He, at the end of the day, Joe loves his mom, and he really wants to protect his mom. He wants to protect his family. He wants to protect his community. Unfortunately, he doesn't know how to, and he sees all these things going around him, and the schizophrenia just makes it worse. Because all of these things, there's so much for a young teenager to go through, and as he's going through, it becomes overwhelming. And so the schizophrenia, it compounds on that anxiety, that fear, that the anger that he has, the frustration, all of that. And so it's very unique to him. I don't, that's something I want people to know, is that, Joe's symptoms aren't universal. It's not like every single schizophrenic kid looks like Joe. Joe doesn't look like every other schizophrenic, episode. It's not just, one set of symptoms. It's not just, it doesn't look one certain way. It's something that every person has, that, or it's something that is unique to every person who has schizophrenia. It's all based off of their own experiences. It's something that can look different, can look scarier, can also be a little tamer. And when I was researching that, that really surprised me, and it really shaped the way that I took to approaching how I would create the depiction of Joe and how I would see the episodes that he was going through.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Because he had it was interesting. I'm just remembering that my husband and I didn't know about the movie, so we came in uh, just kind of expecting it to be like a story about like immigrant families and how to come together, and then we're watching and we're like, does he have schizophrenia? Like what's happening? Just it was just interesting to watch the movie show Joe kind of like having some symptoms and kind of building up. Um, and I remember definitely paranoia was a big one, right? Like paranoia
Yeah.
was one of his biggest. I'm trying to think about like if they showed a lot of his hallucinations. Did he have like what kind of
Yeah,
symptoms
so
were
we
you?
did, yeah, we did do paranoid. That was a big one. I think a lot of the paranoia came from the anxiety that he had when he was
Yeah,
going through everything. It
yeah,
was, like I said, it's a lot for a young man to go through, and so obviously, he had a lot of anxiety. He had a lot of, it was almost, I actually had someone come up to me after a showing, and they said, you know, they mentioned that Joe might also have PTSD. And he was never formally diagnosed. The real Joe was never formally diagnosed with anything, or at least not that we know of. However, that's a very real possibility. Something like your father dying in front of you, that could cause PTSD in a young man, and that could lead to anxiety, paranoia.
yeah,
It could
yeah.
lead to a lot of these things, a lot of these, incredible, just emotions and episodes that he was going through. But yes, obviously the schizophrenia manifested in other ways as well. We kind of played around with it. We didn't, obviously we never had the chance to interview the real Joe, unfortunately, and we never had a chance to know what he was actually thinking or what he was going through. We knew that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia based off the 2017 article from Frank Chong, but
Is that all you knew
we,
about him, the article, or did you?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So
Wow.
yeah, I mean, in the real story, after everything had happened, actually, the uh, the friend was the one who actually went to who was willing to share the story because otherwise, this story would have been buried. It would have ended at the art at the the clickbait news article like Mother. You know, I'm not gonna spoil the ending, but there's a big event and they had a lot of news article about it. But it was only until the friend went to the journalist Frank Chong, who later wrote the 2017 article, that the real story got heard. And so pretty much all we know about them is from that article because there was no other stories, no other interviews. There wasn't even like I couldn't even get a picture of what they actually looked like or what Joe actually looked like. So we had a lot. That's why, that's also why we say this was inspired by a true story,
Yeah.
because a lot of it we kind of had to create ourselves. We did not have a book or a or Bible that kind of told us exactly what they were going through. And when I was, like you said, when I was going through or portraying the schizophrenia and figuring out where to go, in terms of like hallucinations and the paranoia, a lot of that we kind of had to come up with ourselves. And that's also why we did so much research, is because we didn't know what he was going through. We didn't know we just kind of had to imagine it. And so yeah, we definitely played around with hallucinations. We had, even at one point we had like a little earpiece in my ear, to play around with what would it feel like to have voices, because that obviously would be very jarring to hear voices. I would imagine, certain figures popping up in the corners, for visual hallucinations. It wasn't necessarily because that's what schizophrenia is. It was more because I wanted to really put myself in this headspace of this kid who does not know what's going on. He's seeing things and he's hearing things that he does not understand. And whatever they may be, whatever the real Joe might have heard, whatever they might have seen, all we know is that, it was too much. It was overwhelming for him. And that was the kind of headspace that I wanted to get into, was just to be overwhelmed. And so, yeah, we played around with that, and it was a tough, even just acting it out. Like, not even, I mean, I wasn't, I'm not even the real Joe. And I remember just feeling so incredibly burdened and heavy every single day that I was living through these scenes.
How do you do that as an actor? How did you? What is the process of? I don't even know what it's like to be an actor. But when you're on set and you have to do these scenes, and then you have to like to take breaks for different takes. Like how do you get into those intense scenes where he's having pretty intense episodes?
Yeah, a lot of it, actually, I will say this, the hardest or the most scariest part for me actually was not while we were shooting. It was before we were shooting. It was right before, when I first landed in New York and we were like 4 days out from shooting. That was the time when I was terrified. I was just like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do it. This is finally real. Like, I'm here. I'm seeing Lucy. I'm seeing the sets, the costumes. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what's gonna happen, and it was really terrifying. Um, but I do want to say that, and I've said this many, many times, but I'm going to say it again because it is so true and so worth saying, is that we had the most amazing community and the most supportive people on set. Lucy, Eric, Minette, all of our cast and crew, every single person was supportive, was there for each other. And it even got to a point where some of the crew started opening up about their own mental health, their own struggles. And so for me, I felt so safe and so protected that even though at first, it was terrifying, it was overwhelming, and when I went into it, I didn't know if I was gonna be able to do it. I remember thinking I never told anyone, but I remember thinking like, oh my God, like, did I make the right choice by taking this role? Like, yeah, I get to work with Lucy, but it's also so terrifying. Um, but Eric was there for me every day, and one of the things that I talk about with Eric is that he is a director who is willing to be there for you, not just when we're working. A lot of directors, they kind of just direct you while you're on set, and then they go back to their trailer and you go back to yours, and then it's kind of like that's it. But Eric, he would take me out. Even we would have weekends where we weren't shooting, and he would still make the effort to show me around New York, take me out to brunch, and we would talk about our day. And he would talk to me. And I remember there was a few mornings when I would have some thoughts about the scenes, and I would text him or call him at like 8 a.m. in the morning, and he'd pick up and he talked to me about that, even though he's tired and he wants to sleep. It was all just from their support, and Lucy as well. Lucy, I mean, she was just a mom to me
Mm.
in every sense of the word, taking care of me on set, off set. I remember she would literally like sit there after we would finish our scenes. She would sit there and she would talk to me, and it was. I remember it kind of struck me at first because Lucy, she's this big star. She can kind of do whatever she wants on set. She can leave if she wants. She doesn't have to stay, but she would take her time to talk to me about not even just the movie, but just about like who I was. You'd ask me questions like, "How's your family? How are you doing? What school did you go? Did you like school? Like things like that." And it helped me to feel comfortable. And I think at the end of the day, that's kind of how I was able to get into this headspace of Joe,
Mm.
is because I had such a good supporting cast around me. And so when I went into these characters, even though it was so daunting and it was so heavy, when I finished these scenes, it was like I had people there for me who helped me to decompress and helped me to release. So
Mm.
even though, again, it was very heavy and it was very scary, but when I went home, I felt safe, I felt comfortable, I felt supported, and I knew there were people who were looking out for me, and so I never felt overwhelmed.
Mhm.
That was the biggest thing.
Mm.
I never felt like, oh my God, you know, tomorrow's gonna be a nightmare. I'm never gonna be able to finish the scene. It was always like man, if I wanted to see these people so much. I wanted to work with them. I wanted to do my best for them, and so I give so much credit to them because without everyone we had on Rosemead, I truly would not have been able to do
Mhm.
this movie.
I mean, this is a testament to what the movie is about, which is like community around mental health is so
Right.
important, right? And when
Oh
you
yeah.
don't have that, it's I mean, that can make or break someone's recovery. And when you were doing a scene where Joe's having episodes, did you have to get into this like place of fear, or was it were, what was your like? Did you have to picture what the hallucinations or paranoia was like? Like what did it feel like when you were doing it?
Um, it actually it wasn't necessarily always one thing. We would talk about me and Eric. We would do a lot of prep before each scene, especially the schizophrenia scene. We would talk mostly about what we were seeing and what we were hearing. That was the biggest thing, and I would kind of just in the moment work off of that. It wasn't necessarily like, oh, I'm gonna go into this scene and it's like I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared. It was more just okay, for example, Joe is in a classroom and he starts hearing voices, he starts seeing, little movements, and it's like for me, it was a lot of it was just reacting off of that, you know, like how would I react if there was like if I saw someone thought someone was going to come into this room and hurt me, you know, how scared would I be? Would I be scared? Would I be angry? Would I be, would I be panicking? Like what would going on and what was going on? And so it was very much I would kind of just build off of that. I never there wasn't any scene where I would necessarily like come in with an emotion already planned. Uh, Mostly because that I mean doing that kind of makes it feel a little more too rehearsed for me. As a actor, I like to go in things a little bit fresh. I like to kind of just react to the scene and the characters and especially scenes with Lucy. I love to react off of her. I mean, she's so talented, so it's like I'm naturally going to react off of her and play off of her. But with the schizophrenia scenes, yeah, I mean, we would have different, like, I guess we can call them like guideposts. We would have like, oh, this is in this moment, this is kind of what Joe's seeing. This is what Joe's hearing, and this is how people around him are reacting to him. And based off of that, I would kind of create what I would do. I would create the episode, and so there were some scenes where maybe he's a little more angry, and so he would be a little more physical, and he would be a little more confrontational. Maybe there were some scenes where he's a little more scared, so he might be a little more subdued, right? He might be just kind of cowering. It all kind of depended. I think, at each scene, that's the thing about schizophrenia, like I said earlier, is that it doesn't look one certain way. Not every episode is the same. Every episode has a catalyst, and each catalyst is based off of what they're going through in that moment, right? And that moment could be triggered by anything. It could have anything. It could be in a school, in your house, in your work, wherever. And you kind of have to take that all into account. And so that's kind of what I did with creating the schizophrenic episodes. I wanted to make sure that it was relevant to the moment and relevant to what Joe was going through at that moment.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I really I thought it was so interesting how Joe would be reacting to stuff that was going on in his family and also the world around him. Like there was all the shootings that year, right? Or in that
Hmm.
area. And to have to like take in information about all this danger and then him feeling overwhelmed by it or just not knowing how to respond.
Yeah, yeah. It all comes down to, I think, uh, what we found in the article. Because in the article, actually, a lot of this was based off of fact, Joe's interests and Joe's fears. Because in the article, Joe, the real Joe, was actually he was someone who was obsessed with mass shootings. We don't know why necessarily. We can kind of surmise, in my mind, Joe, it came from a place of protection. He was seeing these real world events and he wanted to protect his mother from them. He wanted to protect his family, his friends from them. And so when he was seeing these shootings on the news, these news of violence, it became it became another sort of catalyst for him.
Mhm.
Another situation where he didn't feel safe for himself, for his family, for his mother. Uh, and from that, I think came a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety, which oftentimes compounded into his schizophrenic episodes. And unfortunately, led to unpredictability, led to violence, and led to things that other people kind of judged as, what he was becoming, even though he
Mhm.
wasn't necessarily becoming that because, I mean, even in the real story, Joe never committed any violence. That's something we want to highlight is that he never hurt anybody. We had no reason to believe he was going to hurt anybody. We saw these. All people were going off of was quote unquote concerning behavior, and so that's kind of where they built this narrative. And that's oftentimes the tragic things about a lot of schizophrenic people is people build narratives based off of without doing proper research, without properly talking to them and talking to doctors and psychiatrists and knowing what they're going through. They build narratives, and oftentimes that leads to tragedy.
Mhm.
And with Joe, that's such the case. It's exactly what kind of happens. Joe's mom, Irene, unfortunately, she does not know how to deal with schizophrenia. She doesn't know how to learn about it. She doesn't know how to reach out about it. And so she builds this narrative in her mind. And even though it's from a place of love, even though it's from a place of protection, she wants the best for Joe. She wants to protect Joe. But it ends in tragedy because she just does not understand it, and nobody was willing to help her understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such an interesting point that watching the movie it was like we are aware now with all of these different shootings that mental health plays a role, right? People who tend to do, mass violence have some sort of like, I don't know, they've had videos where they're talking about it, or they're
Yeah.
obsessed with violence or killing or something like that. So when you have someone who is severely mentally ill talking about, shootings and stuff like that, it's like the natural assumption is, oh no, this person is bad, it's dangerous. But it's interesting that it's like a lot of people with mental illness are going to be fixated on danger, but not all of them are dangerous. And the poor kids who have done horrible things, a lot of the time is probably because they're just so ill and they just didn't know what to do. It wasn't a conscious choice to be bad. It was like they
Yeah.
were struggling with something, and it's such a. I think society wants to be like, we want bad people and good people, and with mental illness, it's actually much more complex than that.
Right. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Frank, the journalist actually had this great quote about it. A lot of times, with schizophrenia, people don't know how to help them. And even especially in the United States, the government doesn't really help them either. He said this thing at a Q&A once, and it kind of stuck with me, is that when people encounter individuals with schizophrenia, the first thing they often do is call 911. And the first thing they send when they get called 911 is policemen with guns. And that's oftentimes the first response, whether that person is violent, whether that person is just an episode. We don't know what's going on. They don't try to know what's going on. They come in there, and they see this person who they think to be unstable, and they immediately resort to force.
Mm.
And it's really unfortunate, and that's why I think there's so many tragic outcomes with schizophrenia. You know, People don't understand it. People don't know how to understand it, and they're not willing to get help. They're not willing to educate, because that's something that I think is also really underrated in mental health, is that a lot of people, when they meet someone with schizophrenia or with any sort of mental irregularity, is that they immediately think, well, this person needs to get help. But a lot of times, it's also the person who's taking care of them, the person who's encountering them, who also needs that help. We all kind of need to educate ourselves and to know that we can help each other. We can kind of reach out to each other. And that is where we can avoid tragic outcomes, because like I said, from Frank's quote, a lot of times the first thing we do when we deal with something like this is to resort to force, is
Mhm.
resort to police with guns. And it's like, that's not really conducive to a positive outcome. That's just conducive to more violence and more unstableness and more unpredictability. And if we truly want to help people and avoid these tragic stories, we have to be better, all of us, and we have to know that these people are human beings and we can help them. We have to know that they can be helped.
I mean, you're just speaking my language. My whole mission in life is helping family members and loved ones of people with mental illness, because yeah, when in Irene's case, she has a son who's talking about, obsessed with mass shootings, and she doesn't know what to do. Of course, the natural, like we tell everyone, call 911, and then police show up with guns and handcuffs and pepper spray, and that's traumatizing even if you didn't have a mental illness.
Yeah.
So what do you think that Irene, I mean, I don't think there's a right answer to this, but what do you think Irene should have done, or what do you think that this the community should have done for her and that family?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is no real right answer, because a lot of times it's not really their fault. It's not, and it wasn't Irene's fault that it ended this way. It wasn't, she truly just did not know what else to do. And I think there are people like that today, and that it's really sad to think about because yeah, there are mothers like that who they're immigrant, they come from marginalized communities, so they literally just have no idea where and how to get help. They can barely get help from themselves. And it's like now you throw on like a son who's struggling with schizophrenia, it's like you're throwing, a mountain on top of them. What are they supposed to do? They're only one person. And so it's really tragic. Um, but for me, and I'm saying this not just as an actor who was in Rosemead, but also as just like a human being. I really want stories and messages like this one to be heard because whether or not you agreed with the film or you liked the film or you like the filmmaking, whatever it may be, the thing that I hope the most for Rosemead is that it sparks a conversation and it allows people to learn to interest themselves in mental health, you know. And I think that's the best thing about Rosemead is a lot of times it's a conversation starter. It can allow people to talk about something that they might not otherwise talk about. And that's where we start. For me, I believe that that's where we start. Isn't necessarily, oh, right away, are we going to have the answer? Is this what Irene should have done? Is this what our community should have done? Like no, like we don't have that answer all the way. It's a work in progress. There's so many things that are wrong with our society, our government, on how we deal with mental health and how we help people with mental health. It's not one, oh yeah, we can fix this, do this, blah blah blah, step by step, and we're good. It's a conversation,
Mm.
and right now all we can do is inspire people to join that conversation, and that's I think what Rosemead can do, and that's what I hope it will do, is that it will inspire people to join this conversation and so that way we can have more people talking about it, we can have more people aware of it, and possibly even educate themselves about it. And the more we do that, the closer we can get to having an answer, and the closer we can get to having something that can help everyone. Can help all the Irenes and all the Joes in the world. It's something that I think needs to start.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful, and that was something that struck me at the Q&A um, when I saw it with Lucy and Eric, and they were saying that I just didn't know the production behind it, and the fact that she was like, it was so hard to get this movie made because, like it's not the Hollywood, typical commercial thing that would just be like a blockbuster. It's a really hard story,
Mm-hmm.
and they were so dedicated to just getting that story told. And I was like, wow, this has more of a mission behind it than just like, like Hollywood, whatever.
Yeah.
So, um, it's really incredible. And just to, I like thinking about what you're saying of helping people understand that schizophrenia is actually more common because as a psychologist, I barely knew that. Like, I just assumed that it was like a few people who are on the streets or in a institution somewhere, very, very crazy. But then, for example, I worked in an emergency room, and there were people coming in and out who didn't have diagnosed schizophrenia, but they had a bad drug episode and were seeing things and hearing things, and they got scared. And it's just interesting to see that we all know about depression and anxiety, but
Mm-hmm.
hallucinations, paranoia, all those symptoms, more people have it than they're aware of. And then what do you do when your loved one has it? Like, that's ooh, scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's something. It struck me too. I mean, I actually, I realized I picked up on that kind of later on. That was actually something that I learned after the movie kind of started playing around because I would get so many people who would come up to me and they'd tell me, hey, like my brother struggled with schizophrenia, my cousin struggled, my friends struggled with schizophrenia, and I remember there was like a few screenings or back-to-back screenings we had where it was like almost every screening, there would be someone or one or two people come up to me and they tell me that. And it was so crazy to me because it's like, oh, yeah, like you said, a lot of times when you think of schizophrenia, you don't think of every day. People, you think of like, oh, the extreme cases, you think of these, things you see on TV, maybe you think of, like interviews you see on YouTube, but you don't think of like, oh, well, this is around, this is in my community, this is in my neighborhood. But it very much is, schizophrenia is something that it is in a lot of ways universal. It touches so many people. Whether or not you have schizophrenia yourself, you probably know someone who does, or know someone who knows someone who does. It's all kind of connected in that way. And that's, again, why I'm so proud of this film, because yes, it's not the Hollywood blockbuster. Yes, it's probably not going to make, millions of dollars at the box office, but it's something that is important because it's not everywhere. You mean look at the releases we have right now, it's not around. Yes, we have happy holiday movies. Yes, we have great films coming out, and yes, they are worth watching and you should watch them and enjoy them. But, a lot of times you also need education. We need films that can help our communities, help us inspire conversation, and help us learn about something that we might not otherwise learn about. And I'm proud of Rosemead, for that, regardless of what we do at the box office, regardless of how many people see it, it's something that I think we really did. And I really hope that, whether studios or other filmmakers can see it and be inspired to make their own films about mental health, because it is something that is worth getting out there, and I think it needs to be get at, more publicly, more accessible. And I hope it doesn't just end here. I hope, yes, we had a lot of difficulties. I'm sure Lucy talked about it a lot, but there's also there's a lot of hope, and there's a lot of things that this film can do that people need.
Hmm.
And I think that's really worth doing.
Yeah. I really, I really admired how you, in the spirit of getting raising awareness, how you, when especially when Joe was having intense episodes, or at least the episodes were coming on, you had this like you went like more internal, like
Hmm.
I really even when he was had the most extreme, right, or when he was he went missing and was found. There was kind of like a blank look in your eyes, and it was like everything was happening internally. Like it almost is like kind of hmm, like kind of zoned out or shut down from the outside. But I'm
Yeah.
sure there was a lot happening on the inside. I thought that was so cool because it was usually when people don't know about schizophrenia, they just assume that it's like someone who's just like, "Ah," just like yelling and screaming on the street. But actually, there's so much of a going inward and shutting down and isolating that we we're having a problem with that everywhere, right? Like so many parents are worried about their kids who are disappearing into their phones and stuff like that. So the show of the depicting mental health crisis as like drawing inward was just fascinating. I thought you did a great job just
So
doing that.
thank
That was
you.
awesome. I was like, oh wow, just like you could see you like having like being sensitive and paying attention to the world around you, and then kind of going inward and blanking out. Oof, that must have been hard to do to like just be in that headspace.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's also another word I think that is very important, isolation. I think both of them dealt with a lot of isolation, not even just schizophrenia, but also, cancer. That's also something that's isolating to a lot of people. It creates distance between themselves and their family members, their friends, or communities, which is, again, very, very tragic and very unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, for those scenes, Joe, I think something I really wanted audiences to understand is that Joe is just a kid who's going through this. He's not like an adult who, knows about or understands, anything. Like he's a kid. Like one minute he was this normal student in class, on the swim team, doing everything a normal kid would do, and the next minute he's going through unspeakable horrible thoughts and emotions and episodes, and it's like it all has an effect on him. Sometimes I think, like you said, he was kind of drawing in, a lot of that I kind of found because, you know, that was something that I did a lot of times. When I dealt with something that was overwhelming or I didn't know what to do, I would kind of shut myself in, and that comes with, obviously I mean, I never dealt with schizophrenia myself personally, but I did deal with, depression. I had, times where I had my own mental health struggles, and I would just kind of close myself in, and I wouldn't talk to anybody. I wouldn't do anything. And I would just kind of walk around every day, and I'd look lost. I'd look apathetic. It was all part of that. And I kind of factored that into my performance, because it is a lot of isolation. And as a kid, you don't have the answers. You don't know what to do. So you just shut yourself in. And so, when he was going through these episodes, when he was in the thick of what he was going through, and he was so overwhelmed and so just out of control, I think to me the answer in that moment was just shutting down. He literally physically could not, do anything. He was like a robot at that point. He was like a shell of himself. It was like he had been almost shattered, just by the trauma, by the experiences, and it was a difficult scene. I still I know the scene you're talking about, and I still remember it. It's still very much ingrained in my head. I mean, all of them are, but that one and a few other ones particularly are really, really stuck in my head because I just remember, yeah, like just it was so much tragedy, and I remember just feeling so much sadness and so much, oh, just so much shame for all the things that Joe went through, that he had to go through these things, that he did not have anyone there to even just tell him that, hey, this is okay. I think, even just someone just going up to him being like, hey, like, this is okay. What you're going through is normal. Like, that would have been so helpful, but he never had that. And he kind of just had to do these things alone.
He did have his friends. He did, and the therapist who tried to,
Yeah.
tried to help.
Yeah, well, yeah, he did. He did have him a bit, I think that's also kind of where the shutting out came from. His friends, they tried to get him to open up a bit, and he did open up a little bit to them when they had that scene and they were
Hmm.
talking. But I think at the end of the day, Joe didn't know how to fully open up. He didn't know how to fully express his struggles. And I think that's also where the shame and the stigma comes in the Asian community. It's like you don't talk about your problems, right?
Yeah.
So when they were trying to get him to open up, he did a little bit, but he never fully quite accepted that help. He was kind of like he was still a little apprehensive, and unfortunately, because of that, kind of fell back into it. And I think I mean, his friends are also kids. They're also children,
Hmm.
and they didn't know how to fully, continue giving him that help, even though they knew he needed it and they were trying, they wanted to help him, but I don't think they fully understood it. And then Irene at the same time, same exact case, wanted to help him, loved him so much, so deeply, so dearly, wanted everything to protect him, just did not know how to do it. And eventually got to this place where she held so much shame that she started isolating themselves. She cut off the therapist. She said, you're not helping us anymore. We're leaving, right? It's getting worse. And she did not recognize that, these are people that we need to help Joe. This is the community. This is people we need to have around us. But she was ashamed of it. She was ashamed that these people were seeing their struggles. She was ashamed that Joe was, on the street. She was ashamed that she felt like she was a bad mother for letting him do these things. She felt like it was her fault. And so, she felt that therapy was somehow, exposing her flaws, and it all just became this horrible tragic event. And these people, unfortunately, at some point they just didn't know what else to do, and it just got worse and worse. And that's the ultimate tragedy. I think that it could have been avoidable, but because of the shame that we have in our societies, the judgment that we have, and the lack of awareness and lack of education, a lot of times people in our community resort to isolation and resort to dealing with themselves even though they don't know and don't have the resources to deal with something like this.
One last question I had was, how did you think about the medication piece? Because the few people I know with struggling with schizophrenia, they are on antipsychotics, which is like really effective, but yet it's
Hmm.
really hard to get them to take them, right? People don't like them, and or they just forget. It's hard to get people with schizophrenia like to stay on their meds. And there was a lot of showing Joe taking it and the mother monitoring. It was an interesting piece too of like family members when you have someone with mental illness or addiction or something. You're it's like this constant looking of like, did they take their meds? Are they going to
Oh yeah.
treatment? Like kind of having to check up on them behind the scenes. How did you guys talk about like, wanting to show the whole medication piece?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think, well, first of all, a lot of that came, credit to Marilyn Fu, our incredible screenwriter. She wrote a lot of that into the script. And so obviously she had her research and she knew that, uh, I mean, I also knew this when I was researching that, a lot of people with mental health, they do not like the medication. They do not want to take the medication, for various reasons. A lot of, so, some of them, they don't like the side effects. They don't like that it dulls them. They don't like that, it makes them, they feel like it messes with their brain. If some of them, I remember I was watching this interview of this guy who was talking about who got schizophrenia. He was talking about what it felt like when he was taking his medication, and he felt like it was making it worse. He was like, this isn't making me better. This is, when I'm on medication, I feel like I'm a shell. I'm not even a real person anymore. And he's like, I don't take medication because I want to feel like myself. And so, yeah, of course, because of that, it becomes a struggle. It becomes a struggle for them, for the people around them, for their caretakers, for them to accept that medication. And unfortunately, I think for Joe, it's a similar situation where, he goes into it, he's given this medication and he feels like I mean, I think there's a scene where he literally types it out on his phone. He's like, it's dulling my senses, and I think that kind of came from, for me at least, it came from, what I learned, these people, they feel like this medication, it's not helping them. It's not, even though, it very much is, it's not something that they need. They're like, you know, this is erasing myself. This is erasing my identity, and so such a battle and such a struggle for them to take it. And unfortunately, that's another incredibly tragic aspect of schizophrenia and mental health is that we have to, a lot of times, really, really, we have to get them to accept things that sometimes they don't want to accept. We have to tell them that, hey, this is helping you. That's something that Joe didn't have. He didn't have people who were explaining to him, as he was going through these things, like, hey, this medication is helping you. What you're seeing is okay. What you're seeing is normal. What you're going through is just a part of it. And this will help you to feel better. And this will help you to live more normally, and this will help you to become yourself. It's not erasing yourself, it's helping you become yourself. And he just didn't understand that. And so he fought it. And of course, Irene didn't understand it either. And as a result, she kind of had her own struggle with it. And she tried to make him take it. She counted the pills and she did all that. But in the end of the day, it just kind of became this really, really tragic misunderstanding. And I think that's something that happens with a lot of people with mental health and schizophrenia, is that they don't understand what they're going through.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really really well said. And it's it's tough because it's like it's sometimes it's a choice for treatment. It's like you can have this treatment and get these benefits and side effects, but then if you don't have it, you have this and you have to choose. But knowing that choice is important. And if you're scared about your family and the world and you're like, I have to prepare myself, but this medication dulls me, I mean, of course it would be
Yeah.
hard to take something like this. So, um, I actually have one more question. Do you have
Sure,
time?
yeah. Oh, yeah, no problem. Yeah.
This is kind of a side question that just popped in my mind. I don't know much about this, but what do you think about the Rob Reiner family story? I mean, like having Rosemead come out and then this very public story of family with schizophrenia. Like, what are you guys talking about it? What are you thinking when you hear this terrible
Yeah.
tragedy?
Has Nick been formally diagnosed with schizophrenia? I heard some rumors about I looked it up. It wasn't never confirmed for me
I
that he
mean,
had
I
schizophrenia.
just, this is one of those things where the internet is just flooded with stuff. And I don't know what specific
Yeah,
diagnosis he has, but some people said addiction, some people said
right.
schizophrenia, but it's like a mental health issue.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's like,
Um,
oh, that makes it all scary again, right?
oh
Like,
yeah, absolutely. I think, again, like I said, every person is different, every scenario is different. I don't know what went on in their family. I do know that he struggled with drug addiction. I know that his family tried to help him and he refused their help a lot of times and he relapsed a
Mhm.
few times. Um, and I can't speak too much about Nick himself. I can't speak too much about what his thought process was because I don't know. I mean, I'm reading the tabloids too. I'm sure there's more to it. I'm sure there were more catalysts and more reasons behind his actions and what ultimately led to him doing that. Uh, but I think this is what happens. The tragedies like this one are not uncommon because a lot of times people who struggle with mental health, they either they don't understand what they're going through, they don't get the proper help, and then they refuse the help that comes after when people try to help them, they refuse it. And as a result, it kind of becomes unchecked. And it gets worse through things like drugs, right? I know Nick, he fell into this habit of drug use, and I'm sure that had a huge effect on what he went through and why he ultimately chose to do what he did. I mean, this is all speculation. I don't want to speak too much
No.
about it. It's all speculation. It could have been, I mean, he could have had debts. He could have had, whatever. It could have just been, I do want to encourage people though to, have empathy when it comes to these cases, because again, we don't understand. It's really easy to judge. It's really easy to say, oh, well, he did this because of that. He did this because he's crazy, because he's schizophrenia, whatever, right? But, it's not as simple. It's never as simple as that. It's never as simple. When people read this article too, I mean, with Rosemead, the article, I don't know if you've seen it. It's very clickbaity. I'm not going to spoil the ending,
Yeah.
but it's very clickbaity. It kind of tells you exactly what the mother does. Um, and when people read that article at first, they wrote her off. They said, "Oh, well, she's the villain. She's evil. She, did this act of, horrible, horrible. Like how can you justify that? There's no way to just like. Of course, she's evil. She did that, and so it became this even more judgment, even more shame, and even more situation of, oh my God, this is what's happening. This is the way it is. But when the article came out, it shed this whole new light. She's not just this monster who did this monstrous act. She was a mother who loved her son. There was so much more around it. There was so much more around these two people, and it provided context. And I think, again, that's why we wanted to make this movie, is because we don't want people to just stop at the headline, which might be what a lot of people are doing with the Nick Reiner case. They're stopping at the headline. Oh, Nick Reiner kills his parents. Okay, well, that's it. That's the end of story, right? He's crazy. He's evil. Blah blah blah. We're finished. But I encourage people to be empathetic. Right now we don't have we don't have all the elements to the story. We don't know exactly what's going on, and I just encourage people to not necessarily write it off right away. Keep yourself open, and know that these people need help. These people are people that need help and can be helped. And ultimately, that's how we avoid these tragedies, because it's really easy to write them off. But when you write them off, that's how more of these tragedies happen, is when we write these people off, when we say, oh, this is how it has to be, this is how they are. We need to learn to accept these people as human beings. and learn that tragedies like this one are not unique and that they can be avoided. And it all starts with, you know, learning more of who they are, being open to not just the headline, but also the entire story around it.
That was so beautifully said. Such a great takeaway of like what Rosemead was all about, which is with mental health and families. It doesn't look the same with everyone. We need community support, and understanding more about it and the complexities and the love behind it is a way to make sure that all these tragedies don't happen more often. So really well said. Is there anything you want to tell the audiences how they could see it or anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. We open all over the US this Friday. So this week, January 9th, we open in 15 major cities. So if you live in California or New York, Chicago, Florida, there's a few other ones. You can check the Rosemead Instagram page at Rosemead Film for all the details, and you can get tickets on Fandango or wherever the theater distributor may be. But yeah, I mean, I hope you all, whoever may be watching, gets a chance to see this film. I think it's something that is really worth seeing. And also, I mean, if you just want to see great acting too, that's also a great reason to see it. I mean, Lucy absolutely kills it. This is a feature debut for myself and for Eric, our director. So this is our first film. So we're really, really proud of it. We hope you get the chance to see it. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. This has been such an amazing conversation. I've been dying to talk to you after seeing the movie. For anyone who's interested in mental health or just want to see a good movie, go see Rosemead. And where can they find you? Is there Instagram page or any place where they could reach out to you or learn more about the movie or what?
Yeah, of course. I am avail. I don't have too many social media platforms. I mostly use Instagram. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, that would be, that'd be great. My name's Lawrence, Lawrence. Last name Shou, Shou. You can just Google that or search it up. You'll see it. And yeah, and as for the film, we have our Rosemead Instagram page. You can, we also, I mean, I think Rosemead has socials all over, so you can
I'll
find us
link
on
it on the.
Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, yeah, any of that. If you want to learn more about the film, or the story, or everything that goes around about behind the scenes, any of that, you can check us out. And yeah, I hope you guys get the chance to see the film this Friday.
Definitely, definitely go see it. Thank you so much, Lawrence. And for Little Helpers, go see Rosemead in theaters. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
By accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that the host of this podcast makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information purposes only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial, informational purposes only, and do not constitute the practice of any medical or any professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The host does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast. And information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Thank you.